Everybody has it backwards when it comes to perfectionism, because perfectionism isn't a problem to solve, rather it's a problem to dissolve. What I mean by this is that no strategy of trying to overcome perfectionism, no amount of doing, will ever actually have a sustainable effect on the constraints that perfectionism puts on your life. What we need to address is the underlying code inside of our subconscious mind, and even I would say our nervous system, that is creating the adaptation that says, I need this to be perfect. So in this video, I really want to explore the 3 core fears, or the 3 core pieces of underlying code that create perfectionism, and how you can understand them more deeply so that you can deconstruct them and dissolve them by creating a new relationship to yourself beyond the constraints of fear, so that you can feel like you can ship your work more confidently, share your work and yourself with the world, allow yourself to be seen more authentically, so that you don't have to be limited by the limitations that perfectionism imposes on us. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, if you're ready to finally be done with perfectionism, this is the video for you. So if you're new here, my name's Kev. I've struggled with perfectionism my whole life as an ambitious creative. And now I can say that although I still have this tendency to strive for things to be excellent, I no longer operate from the same place of fear, so that I'm able to share my work more confidently. I've won awards for my design. I've been able to really just do some amazing projects in my life as a designer and an architect, and I just want to share what I've learned that's worked for me. By no means is this for everybody. This is going to be some high-level, deep work. So if you're looking for a quick fix, this isn't the video for you. But if you're here to finally put the work in to be beyond the constraints of perfectionism, let's dive straight in. So I want to talk to the 3 core fears. And they all sort of emanate from the same place, but I'll briefly talk about each one so that you can understand which one is really running the show. So we have a fear of inadequacy, we have a fear of insecurity, and we have a fear of scarcity. And how I like to break these down is the fear of inadequacy is the story that says I'm not good enough. It's very related to the self. It's the fundamental belief that I inherently am not valuable enough, and I have to work to become more valuable. So once I am more valuable, once I'm good enough, then X, Y, and Z. This is the one that I really feel like I struggle the most with, this deep story of not being good enough. Now, we pick up that story from life, a lifetime of, nuanced feedback and maybe more grandiose moments and just childhood events that led us to believe that who we naturally are is not good enough. So how this relates to perfectionism is we tend to compensate, right? So if I'm not good enough, I better try my hardest to be good enough so that the world accepts me. So I better make sure that the creative work that I make is perfected. That way there's less room for judgment and I'm more likely to be accepted, right? The only problem is what perfectionism tries to avoid, it ultimately creates. So if I feel like I'm not good enough and my work just is never quite good enough to share with the world, I'm gonna keep striving for this unattainable pursuit of perfection, which means I'm not gonna end up sharing my work. I'm never quite gonna feel good enough. My work isn't gonna feel good enough, which is really actually just a reflection of the belief you have of yourself. And so we keep perpetuating this loop like, oh, once it's good enough, I'll share it. But it's never good enough, so I'm not gonna share it. And since it's not good enough, I'm believing that I'm not good enough and I have to keep working harder. And you see that it's this vicious cycle. And it's nuanced. Most people don't see it that way because they're just so caught up in the thing. But the thing is always a reflection of you. So just being aware of the fact how this story starts to run its course is really helpful and can be very transformative to just you creating a little bit of space between yourself and your work and realizing like, oh, like my work is this way because I'm this way. So I can't change the work unless I begin to change myself. Now I don't want to go too deep because I have a whole masterclass on perfectionism, which I'll link to you at the end. So I want to dive into the next fear, which is the fear of an insecurity. And insecurity is more related to other, right? It's about judgment. Even though it's inside of ourself, we are insecure because of how the world might think of us. So while the fear of inadequacy is kind of self-contained, like I'm not good enough, insecurity relates to how others are perceiving us. It still has to do a lot with not being good enough, but it's more outwardly focused. It's more fearing the judgment, right? So it's, oh, you know what, I'm not going to, follow through with that business idea because what are my friends gonna think? Is anybody even gonna like it? Is it even worthwhile? What if, it's just better that I don't do it? We all have some relationship to what it's like to let others, the perception of what others might think of us, dictate what we do. The funny part is everyone is always doing that, so we get caught up in our own little world, but it's like the person standing right next to you is dealing with the same exact thing. They're so caught up in themselves that they don't really have time and space for you. Like, yeah, there might be judgment for sure, but the degree that you're impacted by that judgment is the degree that you already believe it. Again, the belief of not being good enough, it's all part and parcel. But I just want to break down these fears so you have a better understanding of which ones are really running the show for you. And then the next is the fear of scarcity, right? This has to do with the world, that there's not enough out there. So why should I even try? Like, it's not good enough anyways, there's not enough for me. So it doesn't matter what I do, there's still not going to be enough. So it's futile, right? So we have the self, the other, and the world as emanations of fears and how they kind of control us and keep us small, right? Because ultimately perfectionism is just keeping us small. Even though it might masquerade as like a pursuit of excellence, really what it does is it keeps us really bounded. It keeps us in this really small, confined box that we hope to one day break out of by finally making that perfect song, by finally making the perfect business or whatever it is. But we never quite get there, right? Because we keep pushing the goalpost back as we move forward. So it's like we're moving in space and time because we're taking these insecurities, these fears with us, right? So with awareness of these fears, and why I bring these up is these are really what create the little adaptations of behavior over time. So if I have a fear of not being good enough, I'm gonna, over decades, begin to adapt my behavior to put on this sort of like inauthentic or kind of, this extra sort of, layer of armor that ensures that what I do present to the world is good enough. So I'm gonna try really hard to be good enough, and I'm only gonna show the best parts of me, and I'm only gonna share my work when it's perfect, and I'm only going to X, Y, and Z. That's exhausting, and it's never ending, right? And that's why no action or strategy of overcoming perfectionism really has lasting effects. And why I think all these gurus have it backwards is because if you really, I like using the analogy of trimming a tree, right? So we have the base of the tree emanates into branches, into smaller branches, in leaves. You can all day long, snip each leaf on the outside, which is what most strategy has you do. It's like, oh, if you want to share more work, you got to do this. You got to share it on this social media platform at this time. That's when people are going to, whatever the hell it is, some silly strategy of doing, right? Oh, no. So when you hit that wall of resistance, you just plow through it and you hit send. And it's like, yeah, that actually might work, right? But it's still not addressing the underlying belief. It's trimming as you encounter each leaf. It's trimming each leaf that you encounter. Whereas how we really start to cook with oil, I like to say, is when we realize, you know what? That branch actually is taking energy and nutrients away from the rest of the tree and the kind of the tree, the parts of the branches that are really growing in the directions that I like. So instead of trying to take back that branch leaf by leaf, I can make one really intentional cut, and I can eliminate all of those outerlying symptoms, because perfectionism is just a symptom of that comes out of these underlying fears. If I make one really well-informed cut, that whole branch with all of those secondary branches and tertiary branches in leaves is now gone. Now, it doesn't mean that energy still doesn't want to go to that part of the tree, which is why you cut off a branch of a tree and then all these shoots grow out. It takes, some discipline to keep trimming them. But this is what I mean by when we address the fundamental deeper code. If we change that story and that narrative in our language, we begin to sort of dissolve this whole side of the story that creates all of these adaptations, right? So instead of trying to work from the outside in, we're going to go from the inside out, the bottom up, right? And the way that we do this, the way that we really look at our underlying code in our subconscious is language. How we use language is really misunderstood. Language actually really uses us, because we think that we use language to describe the world around us, but in reality, we use language to create the world around us. And to be more specific, we use language to create relationship to ourselves, to the world around us, to other people. The problem is, as you know, 95% of our actions, of our thoughts, of our words are unconscious, right? Only 5% is really brought into the conscious realm. So most of the show is run from that underlying code that's not good enough, that's insecure, and thinks that the world is full of scarcity. And the extent to which you continue to reinforce those through language is the extent that you are limited. Now, the goal isn't to just overnight have a radical transformative change and just be like an overnight success and like, I'm never gonna use limiting language again. But here's how I like to frame it. Just go out there and live your life. But really be attentive to the words that you speak, especially when you use words like should, can't, never, and always. Those are really, really strong. There's a strong charge to those words, but they come out very unconsciously. Oh, I should have done that. Or I could have done, could have and would have, those are also good words to look for. Because they show where we're not fully in acceptance for what is. Oh, I should have done that. I could have done that. I would do this, but there are all these ways that we're confining our reality. And then I can't do that. I don't have enough time. I don't have this and that. And that might very well be real and true for you in the moment. But bring your attention to that language, because chances are you find yourself just unconsciously saying these things. And this is why I'm such a stickler with language. And when I work with people, I really deeply listen, because most of the time I will reflect back to people what they just told me, and they really aren't conscious of the fact that they used these types of words that have these implications hidden inside of them, because it's just such a normal part of their life. So become really aware of the language that you use, and once you become aware, then you get the opportunity to take responsibility, right? So you have to become aware before you can really start to create some amount of transformation and change. So once you're aware of your language, then you can start to really kind of get honest with yourself and like, whoa, like, do I actually believe that? Like, why do I think that I cannot do that? Yes, maybe responsibilities might lead me to believe that I can't, or maybe my past history, which is usually what it is, right? Because the way that perfectionism works is I'm trying to avoid a future of fear. Because in the past, when I did this, it didn't work out in my favor, and it instilled in me this belief. So I'm going to try everything that I can now to avoid repeating this past in the future. Yet, what we end up doing is just creating more of what we don't want, because we're just so bound by the past. We're living through this lens. We're not really present. We're trying to avoid this, and we end up just creating more of the thing we're trying to avoid. A great direction that I love to just open people to is, if you no longer had fears of the future, would your fears still exist? And it's really powerful, and a lot of times also disarming, because we put so much of our fear and our limitation on a future. What if I fail? What if it's not good enough? What if people judge me? What if all those things? And those are all rooted in something that's fictitious, right? Because the future isn't real. Once you get there, it's no longer the future, right? It's the right now. Like, the future and the past are really only concepts, People say like, oh, I have some stuff in my past that I need to look at, or I've been living in the past, and it's like, there's no such thing. There's only now, there's nothing in your past because it's with you right now. And any fear of the future is with you right now. So again, that's why we try to avoid this, and we're putting our energy and attention on it, but we're creating it because we're making it real now. Now I get it, this is kind of abstract, it's nuance, but it's so powerful when you really understand that the future you avoid is the thing that you're focusing on, your energy, your attention, and you're trying so hard to avoid that, you're not even really focused on what you want to create, right? This is the tricky wicket about perfectionism and the pursuit of excellence. Perfectionism is rooted in fear. It's, I don't want to fuck this thing up, I don't want X, Y, and Z. The pursuit of excellence I like to frame as how good can this get? And when you think of it in terms of, let's use creative work. I'm a designer, I'm an architect. If I'm coming from the fact it's like, man, I really don't want to blow this project. I don't want to fuck this project up. I'm coming with a completely different energy to the creative process, right? It's tense, my palms are sweaty, my nervous system's a little activated, my heart might be beating fast, I might be thinking about all the worst case scenarios, which is the exact ingredients that will create the thing you don't want, right? Now when I frame it, and again, it's not as easy as just making this shift all the time. It can be, but I'll get to that. Now if I frame it in how good can this project get, how much more spaciousness, how much more freedom fills my body in the creative process, right? How good can this get means that I'm comfortable at every step of the way. Maybe it's not perfect, right? But this feels good and I had fun with it, and I'll share it. And I'll share it with the client. What do you think about it? I'll share it with the world. I'll post it. I'll send the newsletter. I'll launch the business, whatever it is. And then you refine it and make it better along the way, because also feedback is such an important part about our creative process. And perfectionism really prevents us from receiving feedback because we're in fear, so we're going to take it as criticism, right? We're not going to see feedback as an opportunity to really make something so much better. So we've covered the 3 fears, the language, the underlying code, how you can start to think about these things of, man, well, where do my fears exist? And I'm thinking they're in the past or the future, but I'm using language now to create my reality, creating that limitation. Now, how can you really resource yourself to create a sustainable way of working with this underlying code so that you can actually overcome perfectionism, not by solving it, but dissolving it, right? And the key isn't through language and just really getting good discernment with where your limitation's coming from. So look to where you're using those words like I can't, I should, this and that. And I like this reframe, this question of, is it true? So let's use the example of I can't. Like, oh, I can't share that, it's not good enough, or I can't do that yet, I'm not ready, or I don't have enough time. Is it true? I don't have enough time, is it true? I mean, that is so subjective, there's no objective categorical, I can't do that, and it takes getting really honest with yourself. No, I can't work on my passion right now, I don't have enough time. Could you wake up an hour earlier? Could you stay up an hour later? Could you reprioritize the way that you devote your energy? Could you stop using social media? It takes really getting honest with yourself. And again, this is why so many people fall off the bus, because when it really comes to doing the hard work that it requires to create a new relationship to yourself that is not limited by things like perfectionism, it's hard and it's gonna be awkward because we've created a life of comfort, right? We've created a routine that's so grooved into our neurological system and our nervous system, right? So going against the grain, there's gonna be a lot of resistance. I don't have enough time. It's like, I would push back on that. You do have time. How are you prioritizing your time? And chances are, if you're like most people, you are not prioritizing your time very well or very efficiently, or to make space for the things that nourish you. You might be tending to your responsibilities at the cost of not nourishing yourself. Now again, there's so much nuance to that. If you have a family, if you X, Y, and Z, of course, tend to your responsibilities, but also realize that that's a choice to take away from the things that nourish you. Now for the extreme amount of people that have to work 3 jobs and this and that and the other, I get it. Maybe this isn't for you. Maybe you're not at a spot where you're ready to apply yourself and use your creative energy to build something meaningful and impact the world, then this probably isn't for you, right? But for the people that are here, if you've watched 20 minutes of this or whatever, it's time to get really radically honest with yourself. So write down all the ways that you use limiting language. I should, I could, I would, I can't, always, never, because that really is shaping the whole relationship to yourself that dictates your relationship to the world around you. And your dreams are never going to materialize if you're operating from a place of I should, which I'll make a whole nother video on the fact that that's really rooted in shame. Should is shame. Again, part of my imperfectionist workshop. I'll link it at the end of the video. Yeah, and I just love practices, right? And so I think it's really helpful to not just listen to something like this, but to explore it for yourself. So take a week, take a day if you want to be short about it, but take a week and notice how many times you use limiting language. And if you're not constantly talking to people, be honest with yourself when those thoughts are looping, when the should, the can't, the would, when all that comes up, and just take note of it. Like that can be in the journal, that could just be writing down, like, this is a phrase I keep using, this is a phrase I keep using, I don't have enough time, I should have done that, why didn't I make that investment decision, all of these things. Because all of that is creating resistance to you being fully resourced right now. And the only path beyond perfectionism is when you gather parts of yourself from the past, quote, and the fears of the future, and you bring it all to the right now. That's when you're empowered, that's when you're resourced, that's when you can create your best work, and that's what I'm interested in helping you create. So when you've kind of got this list, this ongoing list of the ways that you've observed your limitations and written them down, it's gonna take conscious effort, but begin to apply the equal and opposite when those come up, or at least a question of perception, right? You know, oh, I should have done this, or I should do that. Well, is that true? Is that what I need to do? Is there another opportunity or way of seeing the situation differently? Is there another way that I can be that might lead to a different outcome? It's not binary, it's not A or B. There's always a C, there's always some other alternative to the way that we're living. It's not now or never, although I'm a very big, firm proponent of acting in the present, but there's always a logical third that may not be available in the moment. You know, it may take sitting and slowing everything down. Perfectionism really is all about what we're not making space for, what we're not prioritizing. We're so caught in the fear and we're so caught in the pursuit of doing and perfecting that we're not allowing ourselves to ask, where am I creating from? Where is this fear coming from? When we can begin to work on that fear, perfectionism starts to loosen its grip. We work on that fear through language, and when we begin to dissect that language, we begin to become empowered to use more empowering language. More empowering language will slowly create a different neural pathway, which helps us create a new relationship to ourselves, which forms new beliefs, which forms new thought patterns, which forms new actions, which informs different results. That's the cascade, right? So this is why if I just try to change the results, good luck, man, because that's going to be really exhausting. But if I change the root cause instead of the symptom, that's when I'm going to have lasting impact. So I could talk on and on about perfectionism because it's something that people don't understand. But instead, I have a whole workshop that has really transformed the lives of dozens and dozens and dozens of people in their creative process that I think can be really, really helpful for you. I'm revamping it. So right now you can sign up for the waitlist and be the first to know when it's ready to launch 2.0 because I made it over a year ago and I'm just changed as a person. I've learned more about my creative process and what's helping me consistently sort of work through the limitations that come up, especially with perfectionism. So I figured it's time to update that, right? So if you're interested in really having a great tool in a masterclass and workshops and practices that help you overcome perfectionism, that's the resource for you. But in the meantime, I hope just understanding these fears and the language that you use, how it's creating your reality, can really transform the way that you relate to your creative work or even show up just in life, relationships, whatever it is. So thanks for being here. Thanks for giving me some of your time. I appreciate you so much. Let me know if this is helpful and be sure to subscribe. Thanks, y'all. Ciao.